Frida, do I pass it to you? Yep.
Yeah, well, yes. We'll open the floor for any questions. So short question, identify yourself, your company, and if they're very shy, we might go back to whatever's available there. But if you can just raise your hand, a mic runner will come to you. Okay, there's one lead. There's a mic required there, behind you. So your name, where you're from, and the question, and to whom. Is the mic on?
I can just shout it. It's
I
fine.
think it's on.
But I think
It's
your
on,
mic
it's
is
on.
on
Mic's
now.
on.
Your mic is on now.
Okay. My name's Irina. I'm just setting up a new foundation called the My Nature Foundation. And I have worked a lot with young people who are very passionate about the environment, both in Europe and now increasingly back home in Malaysia. And I think the message that I hear all the time is that, you know, with evidence coming out that actually the potentially catastrophic climate change effects may become irreversible in 18 to 24 months' time. I think that was a recent report by some scientists. There are many young people who think that even things which are very admirable, like the Sky Project and other projects that big companies have, they're not really enough. Because when you tell them 2070, mid of century, end of century, it already sounds alarming when they're hearing things like 18 months, 24 months. And yes, they may sound very radical right now. Extinction Rebellion, I know a lot of people think they're radical, but the reality is that in just 1 year, they've been more effective in bringing this to the mainstream and getting people talking about it, as has Greta Thunberg. You may not agree with her methods, but certainly she's had effect. So I guess my question really is, how can big corporations tap into this sentiment, reassure the young people that they don't need to panic and that they really do care? Because when they hear the words, I don't think they necessarily feel reassured.
Thank you.
Could I take another question? Then we will move
Sure.
on.
One
Another
more question? Is there another question? There's another question here for the gentleman at the back there. So your name, your question.
Thank you. I'm Lalchand, an ex-utility electrical engineer, good friend and king of Gurmeet Singh. The issue is that in Malaysia, I think our prioritization seems to be a little bit inappropriate. Taking one example, let's say energy. We had a law or act on renewable energy before energy efficiency, which is always considered the lowest hanging fruit. In transport, we are supporting plug-in hybrid vehicles and EVs, which, in my opinion, are like rich man's toys, whereas the mild hybrids, which were given incentives under the Pemandu Labs in 2010, do not get that incentive anymore. So you're getting maybe a few thousand instead of tens of thousands of hybrids, which can reduce the emissions much further. Whereas using EVs in Malaysia, in Peninsular, 95% of our electricity is from fossil fuels. So they are not really clean. Nevertheless, I would still support electrified public transport like intra-urban buses because they reduce emissions at the tailpipe. Any comments from the panel on that, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We had two questions. And yeah.
Could I just respond to the first question? So I did say our Sky scenario does look out to 2070. But let's be clear, that's the longer-term implications of climate change. And the implication of the Sky scenario, if you saw that chart on emissions, is that you need to act now, and you need to act dramatically, because the curve for energy, for carbon emissions is still rising, and it needs to come down within the very short-term future. So we're talking about action now in order to deal with a problem which will play out over the next several decades. The immediacy is there and should be apparent. If it wasn't, I apologize, because the hour is late. And if I had more time, I would go into why action now is more important, is critical. As for what Shell might be doing, I could go through a range of initiatives that we are taking, but I'll just mention two. One is that we set up a new energies division in 2016. We've been looking at all forms of energy for a long time, but we explicitly set up a new energies division in 2016. which is investing $2 billion a year in new energy, in the new energies business, and we would love to expand that as and when the opportunities arise in order to do so. The second is that our CEO, Ben van Beurden, made a very clear commitment last year to reduce by 50% the net carbon footprint of all our energy products by 2050. Now, that's a long way ahead, but you've got to start now. And more than that, he has tied senior executives' bonuses to achieving that target. And we've got immediate targets for the next couple of years and the next 2-3 years ahead. So this is where it really begins to affect all of us. And we're very clear, we're going to be part of this energy transition. We're not going to be left out of it, because if you're left out of it, you'll be on the shelf.
Right. Anybody else?
Can I?
Dr. Tan?
I applaud what you're doing, and I think that you should keep rattling the gates. I just want to make an observation of where Malaysia is at. I think we have had a very interesting transition in government, and at the Earth Summit in the 90s, there was another very important policy that was passed. That we always talk about the environmental part, but we forgot the other one. It was Local Agenda 21, community engagement. People like each of you are relevant. So we always talk about saving the world, but we forget that you cannot save the world if you don't have NGO participation. The problem with what I observe is it's not a problem, it's just a transition. A lot of the NGOs are now in government. They won elections and suddenly they become ministers and deputy ministers, and then you cannot see them anymore, no? You've got all this group of people to go through layer after layer and layer. So you cannot get to sit down. Last time you can over Mamak talk, the guy is so free. Now he said, make an appointment with my PA trying to avoid you. So I think you must not forget that it was these two parts. Local Agenda 21, where the government meets the people. I cannot speak for the millennials because I only know one word that I must use before they use. I must use the word, you don't get it, before they use it on me, because they always say, you old man, you don't get it. But we need to engage with the community and the angry young men and women, because they will bring the change. And I think that you must open those doors again. I don't know how. I guess everyone wants to meet the ministers, but maybe we must find that avenue again to bring this back together. Otherwise, you will get protests, you will get riots, you will get uprisings, exactly like what is happening around. And I always like to think that Malaysia, we are so far ahead because we managed to do some things that some countries were, even the countries that had head starts are behind us now. And I think that we can become this little refuge and haven in the midst of giants. And I think that should be the vision in our minds, and it should always start from grassroots. Big corporations also need to get involved in that. And if we can really make a difference. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Tan, would you like to comment a bit on the EV of public transportation?
I know Lal very well.
Right, of course.
I don't know much about electricity, except that try not to use so much.
Can I just say one more thing?
sure,
Sorry,
something,
Dr. Tan said something that just sort of made me think, because of course the big dinosaurs became extinct, but the small mammals survive, and that's why we're all in this room.
Right, that's true.
Dinosaur.
Dr. To, yeah.
Yes, just some quick reaction. First, I fully agree with the finding that you have raised. One, it is increasingly urgent. Two, the scale of the challenge is enormous. Three, what we have been doing is far from being enough. So the time to act is right now, if not yesterday. From the government perspective, from now until next year is another round of opportunity, is another window of opportunity, which is all the parties are expected to submit their updated climate commitments to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So I heard that the minister also mentioned that. So this is the time that countries are putting their actions, their targets, their commitments into this NDC document called National Determined Contribution. As I mentioned in the speech, under the Paris Agreement, all the NDC for now, add together, we are looking at 3-degree scenario. If you assume all the commitments are fulfilled. First, it's unlikely all the commitments were fulfilled. Second is, even they are fulfilled, we're looking at 3-degree scenario.
Right.
And the report you have seen from the IPCC last year, they're looking at 1.5 and 2. And with that half of degree increase, hundreds of millions of people will be exposed to disasters and risks. So how do we do it? I think 2 dimensions. One, in the short term, we have to act now. Everybody, everyone. And second, as I mentioned earlier, second is we have to build a long-term trajectory, long-term roadmap. As Dr. Chu mentioned, there's this 2070 pathway or strategy. But I think all the countries need to do that, or the business need to think about it. What is the longer-term trajectory for the first 5-10 years? What is the energy mix? And then the following decade, what is an energy mix? And by certain year, we definitely need to peak the emissions. And the energy mix definitely need to dramatically shift to renewable energy and clean technology. So this is what I would offer. Short term, we have to act now. Long term, we have to have a very clear low carbon development pathway.
Right, just taking from there, right? I think when we also do the narrative of advocacy, we must look at the Malaysian context. I mean, climate change is a global problem, but it's unique to every country. We've got also development plans, socioeconomic plans, well-being plans. So we need to put that at the back of our mind so that we are very sure about our pathway. And just on grassroots, there are many grassroots innovations happening, grassroots interventions happening in Malaysia itself. And the current government is very much open. The day government knows all is gone. We have always had town hall discussions where people could give feedbacks. And I think when we do, I see my colleague from climate change here as well, when we are trying to revise our NDC, I think we must strive to also have that engagement, because having high targets is good, but what does it mean in our growth plan and all that, right? So, Dr. Lal, I know we have not fully addressed your question. I'm not an expert on energy as well, but I think your point on electrification of public vehicles is very well taken. Could I move on? I'll move on to another 2 more questions.
We don't have time.
I don't have time.
Yeah.
Why not even one? No. All right.
No.
So